It is often said ignorance of the law is not an excuse. Here are some important clauses you need to pay attention to before you sign a contract. Yes, the best thing is to have your lawyer review some of the contractual terms with you, but in terms of your own personal due diligence, I expect you to look out for these clauses I'm about to discuss in the course of this video before you append your signature to a particular contract. The first one is understand the parties involved in that contract. Obviously, you are a party, but you also need to understand the other parties involved. Look out for the validity of those parties. You can check out for their address to know if it's a valid address. This is very important. The next one is understand clearly the obligation clause. What are the obligations of each party involved in this contractual obligation? Let it be crystal. If you need to ask question, understand what the obligations are, not just your own obligation, but for the other parties involved or any other party involved. Very important. The next thing you need to pay attention to is look out for vague and ambiguous words in a contract. If you're reading a contract, look out for the vague and ambiguous words. This is very important so you're not subjected to a particular level of interpretation that you're not aware of from the onset. For instance, a contract can say something like this: the parties are meant to give their best effort in fulfilling these obligations. But the problem is that the best effort here is subjective. So you need to ask more questions to understand what is the standard of measurement in terms of measuring these best efforts. You need to ask questions to understand this. Very, very important. Another clause you need to pay attention to is the duration clause. Pay attention to the duration of the contract, and in paying attention to this, look out for the renewal option. A contract can say that this contract is renewable based on meeting some certain conditions. So you need to understand what those conditions are. You are aware of it before you append your signature to a particular contract. Very important. Another clause you need to pay attention to is the exit and termination clauses. This is a very important clause that you must pay attention to. Let's say you want to exit the contract tomorrow. What and what do you need to know? Or what is the termination penalty? Someone else wants to terminate the contract. What is the penalty? Or what are involved? You need to understand this clause very well. You understand this clause very well. In a contract, an exit clause might come differently and a termination clause might come differently. In other contracts, they might be enshrined together, but pay attention to them. It is very, very pivotal. Another one you need to pay attention to is the liability and indemnity clause. This is another clause that is very important for you to take note of. So you need to understand if something goes wrong tomorrow, who is going to be liable? The terms, you need to be clear about it before you sign a contract. The next clause is the confidentiality clause or the non-disclosure agreement, NDA. You need to understand what is the confidentiality concerning this particular agreement or the whole business together. So you don't go about tomorrow talking about something that you're not meant to speak about. It's very important. So you need to pay attention to it so you are not running afoul of the whole contract. The next thing which is very important is the non-compete and restrictive clause. This clause is absolutely necessary and important, especially for some types of businesses, the entertainment business, the creative business, or even some other businesses. I find it everywhere, but most cases I've handled and seen most times has to do with people that didn't pay attention to this particular clause, the non-compete and restrictive clause, because you might be entering into a business that is saying if you're in this business, you can't associate with a third-party competition, or if you leave tomorrow, you can't do something relating to this particular business for the next 5 years or 10 years. So you need to understand this and pay attention to it. Very, very important that you understand this clause. The next clause that you need to pay attention to and understand is the dispute resolution clause. In drafting agreements, I always tell the parties it's better that we exercise the alternative dispute mechanism first. That's the negotiation, the mediation, the arbitration, even before approaching the court of competent jurisdiction. In fact, in some international contracts, they don't want to have a court of competent jurisdiction as an option for mediation or for dispute resolution. They want to use arbitration or negotiation in terms of resolving the disputes. So you need to pay attention to that clause. Very, very important. Another clause you need to pay attention to is the amendment clause. Understand what the amendment terms are saying. Because in some contracts, the amendment might say something that if there is an amendment, it won't affect the entirety of the contract. It might be just a particular part that it will affect. Even in that, it will also say that maybe if there's an amendment, there can be an addendum to the contract. You need to understand these things. It is very important. Like I said from the onset, it's good to have a lawyer, but in terms of your own personal due diligence, you need to read the contract and pay attention to some of these clauses. My name is Tengot Simeon. I'm a legal consultant, and if you need any legal advisory, you can reach out to us and we'll be there to help and advise you. Look forward to the next video where I'll be sharing more in terms of this contract with respect to some specific industries. For instance, I'm going to be sharing about things you need to look out for before you sign an employment contract. Very, very important. Please share this video and subscribe. Look forward to the next video. Thank you.